So, yeah, halfway houses are not all bad. They were actually really
No,
good.
you can't judge a book by its cover.
No, they were actually really good neighbors.
Yeah.
They're kind of like being watched at all times, so they really should be good neighbors.
Yeah, well, are they really stupidly going to do something right next door to where their parole officer lives? I don't think so.
I don't think so. No, that would just be a really stupid move. You go back to jail. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200.
You go back to jail, and you go back to jail.
Monopoly rules on that one.
No car for you.
So yeah, so the Melvin Stanton case. Melvin Stanton, the individual in general, was I didn't have kind words about him because I read a little bit about his case, and let's just say he never should have seen the light of day after he was incarcerated. I don't really understand why they let him out, except for, that it's a law that they're reacclimating people, which, okay, I get it, but no.
We're gonna go into it in a future episode.
Yep.
This is true. We will. So, nevertheless, Mr. Joseph Fredericks, was granted his release under mandatory supervision in March of 1988.
So this, he gets released on supervision, but up to 2 weeks before Father's Day the next year, because that's when things really start to go downhill and become interesting in this case, as if it wasn't already interesting, But as of 2 weeks prior, Frederick actually moves from Toronto to Brampton. So Brampton's a suburb of Toronto. It's maybe 45 minutes, depending on traffic, outside of the downtown core. So not very far, but he happens to move into the same neighborhood as Christopher Stephenson's, not Simpsons, Stephenson's family. So you wonder why he moves into this neighborhood, and it turns out his parole officer had actually lost track of him. So this is 1988 at this point. So he, people aren't as easy to follow. There's no social media, there's no cell phone records, nothing like that at this point. So he hadn't reported in with his parole officer, so they've lost him. But his parole officer also wasn't aware of his criminal history or mental illness history. So this info had not been provided to the parole officer. So you would think in somebody who is assaulting children, sexually for that matter, they would let the parole officer know, and therefore he could keep a closer eye on him. Not that I blame the parole officer in this case at all.
No, I mean, that happened. And I mean, it's also not the first time that Fredericks has quote unquote escaped. So, I mean, doesn't surprise me. But the fact that they didn't sort of give him a file and being like, here's who you're dealing with is really
unfortunate. Yeah, exactly.
It's just an interesting turn. He also, as Jen mentioned, hadn't been deemed a dangerous offender. So there's a really narrow window where you can do that. It has to happen between the conviction of the individual and the sentencing. So the Crown prosecutor has to put this dangerous offender label on an individual. So a good example of this is Paul Bernardo has a dangerous offender category on top of him. So even though he has been in prison for 25 years and he has technically come up for parole now, the likelihood of him ever being released from prison is slim to none just because of this dangerous offender designation. Another reason why, this didn't get applied is because it can only be applied if the crime is so severe that it carries a 10-year sentence, which, of course, in the case of Fredericks, that wasn't the case. So he didn't actually meet the criteria to be labeled as a designated offender because he took the five-year plea deal. So again, as much as we would have liked it to go to trial, and then maybe he could have done this, I don't, disagree with the parents for not letting the little boy go through with a trial and that whole thing.
Yeah, it's just, it's an unfortunate, series of events, and just,
just so sad. Exactly. And to describe it, one of the psychiatrists while he was in prison said, I know he's going to reoffend, but I just don't know when. So you're
That's always what you
waiting.
want to hear.
Yeah, you're
Oh,
waiting for this offender to reoffend so that you can send him back to prison, which is
mm,
awful.
yeah.
So this brings us to Father's Day in 1988. So young Christopher, who happens to be 11, which sidebar for a minute, did you notice that a lot of his victims were 11?
Yeah,
Yes,
10
they
and
were.
11, like, just
It seemed to be
right in
the
that
And then
very
two
specific.
15-year-olds.
yeah, it seemed to be
Mhm.
but the 15-year-olds were tended to
Were
be
girls.
female, yeah. So it was
Yep,
like he
yep.
liked younger boys, but slightly older women.
Ugh,
Weird.
gives me the heebie-jeebies.
Yes. Anyways, that was a
Yeah.
side note that I realized as we were talking. So Father's Day fell on June 17th, 18th, that weekend, Father's Day weekend of 1988. So at about 9 p.m., which is, going on in the evening, he was Christopher Stephenson was out shopping with his mother and sister at a plaza called Shoppers World in Brampton. So this isn't very far from their house. It's just, running errands. We all do it on a regular basis. Not right now, but that sort of thing. So
The only shopping we do now is on Amazon and hope that we get priority delivery.
Mm.
and it's the randomest stuff they've given priority to. Jen and I were talking about this last
Yes,
night,
it is.
but that's a
As long as
conversation
they
we
keep
had off the podcast. So this was the 80s, so kids got left alone a lot more than they do now. So his mother had actually left him in the mall sort of hallway, looking after all the packages that they had bought while she slipped into a sewing store. Oh my gosh, language. Sewing store to buy some ribbon. But where she was in the store, she could actually see him through the glass window. So as much as she had left him there by himself, she could still see him.
Well, and
But
he's also 11. It's not like he's 5. He knows he can stand and watch a few bags while she pops in to buy some ribbon.
for sure.
It's not yeah.
So,
Yeah,
but what
it seems so harmless.
Yeah, it seems
Mm.
so harmless. I'll just run into the store, leave him standing here with the bags. But what she didn't know is that Fredericks had already been stalking them in the mall. So he had been following them, following this young family, had been following them around the mall, and took his chance when he saw her go into the sewing store and actually forced young Christopher out of the mall at knife point while the mother was distracted in the store. So this poor child, he's 11 years old, is being taken out of the store by knife point. I can only imagine the terror that would be.
Oh, just
Yeah.
that's awful. Well, and the terror of the mom too. You turn away for a second and you turn back and he's just gone.
Yeah. So luckily, a photo store manager, so the photo studio across the hall or in the same plaza, Harry Moreland had actually seen Christopher being taken out of the mall. So he reported to the mom, who was, of course, panicked, that he had been leaving with a man in his 50s. So this gave police, enough to get a composite sketch done by the photo studio manager, which was great. So they were able to put these, on TV, into the news, get help from the public, which included a former roommate of Frederick's and his parole officer, who of course has been looking for him. And
Mhm.
from these tips, they were actually able to determine that it was probably Fredericks who was the likely suspect. But remember, we don't know where Fredericks is living at this point, any of that, because his parole officer had lost track of him.
Yep.
Right? So,
So they can
unfortunately,
identify who took him, but they don't know where the heck he's gone.
exactly.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
unfortunately, by the time they did get there, it was too late. So, Christopher had been held overnight, sexually assaulted, who knows how many times, choked, and eventually stabbed in the neck where he bled to death. So this is awful. So this all happened within a kilometer from the mall and his home.
Oh, just awful.
Yeah. So there is statistics that I found that actually showed that a number of child abductions happen within that sort of kilometer from home. You know how you always hear, car accidents happen within 10 kilometers of home? Apparently,
Mhm.
child
Hmm.
abductions, it's even closer.
Great.
Yeah, really.
Yeah.
Creepy.
So police actually were able to find Fredericks eventually, um, and he actually confessed to the kidnapping and murder of young Christopher, and took police right to his body.
Which, I mean, thank goodness that it at least wasn't drawn out any further. Like, it was just he confessed, took him to the body, and there were no mind games, no nothing. Just at
Yeah, this
least some
was like the
closure.
next day.
Yeah.
So, and who knows if he would have been found, like knowing that intersection, I'm not sure if he would have been found um that soon after, because at that point it
Hmm.
wouldn't have been very developed.
Mhm.
So, just a creepy fact, as much as he was stalking him, to me it sounds like a crime of opportunity, but he must have had some planning as well, because when police searched his apartment, they found a note, um, or at least one source said this. We're not sure if it's actually true or not, but they found a note in Christopher's handwriting that started, dear mom and dad, I'm writing you this note, dot, 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 suggesting that Fredericks had planned on covering it up or anything like this. But it's not corroborated. Only one source we could find said that. We obviously don't have access to if there was an actual note or not. But it's just creepy that, you see lots of cover ups with adults in terms of suicide notes and things like that. But an
Hmm.
11-year-old
Mhm.
kid,
But I think I've heard of that before where they've had the kid write a note basically being like, I'm running away from home, or, like, I'm fine, I'm safe, don't come look for me, something like that. Like, I don't think that that's the first I've heard of that. Yeah. Um,
so